Bismillah wa salatu wa salamu ala Rasulillah wa ba'd. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome to part number 5, video number 5 in this series of discussions, a reading really of the excellent book by Dr. Ahmad Bassam Saeh, المعجزة. So let's continue with our discussion and see what's next on our agenda. Right, so in this section, Dr. Ahmad Bassam Saeh is doing a literature review, and this is really in his English book. In fact, in his summary, like I told you in the beginning, that this is an English translation of his own summary of his own book called Mkhtasar Kitab, Al-Mu'jiza. The literature review is not very detailed. It's not really a literature review. It's a literature report, so to speak. So this is a short literature report, and in which he tells us about some of the works that have dealt with the miraculousness of the Qur'an before him, and how he departs from their ways and how his work is original. So he says Muslim scholars from both earlier and later periods undertook through and thorough and tireless studies of what they refer to as the miraculousness of the Qur'an, إعجاز القرآن. Such studies dealt with three main areas. So he identifies three main areas that the scholars who've come before him dealt with. Number one, of the first of these areas is the aesthetic or rhetorical aspect of the Qur'an. Studies dealing with this aspect of the Qur'an's language set out to demonstrate that the Qur'an is an aesthetic miracle in its language and arrangement. The first scholars to develop this theme included Al-Jahiz. Well, if I go into this in detail, I can tell you about these authors and their works. I've read almost, except for one or two, I've read almost all of these authors, at least one book by each of these authors. But this is not the time or place to go into this. Just by the way, Abul Hasan Ali Ar-Rumani, he was a Mu'tazilite, just telling you by the way. Anyway, so these works, the first scholars to develop this theme include these scholars. And then he comments on these works and says, however, beauty remains a relative phenomenon, like we talked about in the previous video, remains a relative phenomenon which, as such, is subject to debate, and the standards relevant to which may differ from one individual to another, one society to another, and one era to another. Hence, it needs to be recognized that if virtually any Western non-Muslim linguist adopted the same approaches and methods adhered to by Muslim scholars in their study of the Qur'an, he would be led to conclude that geniuses like the likes of Shakespeare, Dante, Rousseau, Goethe were all gods. I think he is exaggerating a bit, just a little bit, but every author does that when he is writing something and he wants to show you how he departs from the scholarship that has already come before him. I think everyone does that. However, there is some truth to what he's saying. And this all comes down to the idea that we discussed in the beginning of this series, that saying that the Qur'an is a miracle is a very vague thing, right? And so what he's hinting at is the vagueness of the ventures that have already undergone before him. It's vague to say it's beautiful, or that its beauty does not match anything else It is the most beautiful, the most eloquent work. Of course, we believe in these things, in these terms, and in these attributes, being Muslims. But in objective, empirical, scientific terms, saying that the Quran is the most beautiful work of literature, most eloquent work of literature that you'll ever come across, doesn't hold any scientific merit, doesn't hold any scientific or empirical merit. You understand that, right? The second of these aspects is the expressional aspect. Studies dealing with the Qur'an's expressional dimension aim to show that the Qur'an is a linguistic miracle based on its precision of expression. Authors of such studies discuss the subtle distinctions among Quranic terms, structures, and expressions which, although they appear to be alike, are not actually so. Such terms, structures, and expressions which came to be known among scholars as mutashabih al-Qur'an were pointed out by Al-Jahiz in his book Al-Bayan wa Tabyin. Some call it Al-Bayan wa Tabayyun. References was also made to them by Al-Qadi Abdul Jabbar in his book Mutashabih al-Qur'an, by Muhammad ibn Abdullah al-Iskafi in his book entitled Durrat al-Tanzil wa Ghurrat al-Ta'wil, very famous book, and so on and so forth. The scientific aspect, now the third type. Now, notice one thing. After talking about the scholarship on the second aspect, Dr. Ahmad Bassam Saeh does not say anything about it. He does not comment on it the way he has commented on these works relating to the first aspect, the aesthetic or rhetorical aspect of the Quran. There is a reason behind it. These works, for example, this work by Iskafi in his book Durrat al-Tanzil, Ghurrat al-Ta'wil, or this book by Fakhruddin al-Razi, it's called Israr al-Tanzil. These books are of highest merit. And really what the authors are saying in these books, they are also embarking on a very similar venture to Dr. Ahmad Bassam Saeh, if not equally so. So if you read these books, you will notice how meticulous these authors were with their research, with their scientific research, with their data collection. And so Dr. Ahmad Bassam Saeh wouldn't comment on these works as he has commented on the previous ones. The third aspect, the scientific aspect, contrary to popularly held belief, this theme began to appear quite early in the written Islamic tradition. Early Islamic scholars and later scholars as well attempted to demonstrate the miraculous nature of the Quran based on the fact that it speaks of cosmic realities and natural phenomena that were not discovered until long after the appearance of the Quran itself. If these writings weren't so haphazard and unscientific, they would be virtually unassailable. Unfortunately, however, most of the contemporary scholars who have treated this theme have done little more than made fools of both themselves and their readers. This is a problem, really. There is something called Bukhaism. If you venture into the current debate on this scientific aspect of the Quran among the apologists, the Christian and Muslim apologists, this book by Mars Bukhari has come under heavy criticism as being funded by the East as a propaganda. And really, when you say Quran is a scientific miracle, what do you really mean? What do you exactly mean? Quran is not a book of science. the most peculiar aspect about this scientific debate and this scientific phenomenon is that Muslim scholars only point out these things in the Qur'an, these miracles, these scientific, so-called scientific miracles in the Qur'an, after the science has discovered them. And so, what are you really doing? It's really haphazard, and most of these people who talk about the scientific miracles in the Qur'an, in fact, 99.999% of them are not even scientists. They are not. And so what are you talking about, really? Dr. Ahmad Bassam Saeh talks about how the previous scholars who talked about this were at least justified in doing so, because at that point in time, Islam was really the hub of civilization. And they were the pioneers. They were the pioneers in science and mathematics and whatnot. But nowadays, it's really ridiculous the way some of these newer ulama, so-called scholars, have put the things down. Then he comes to another aspect of this. By the way, let's read this today's section. Today, by contrast, things are precisely the opposite. The centers of academic and scientific research, discovery, innovation, and decision-making have moved to the other side of the world, and civilization is being written from left to right. The first Muslim scholars to write on the theme of scientific miraculousness were these. The writing movement on this topic picked up speed in the 20th century, resulting in the publication of a series of books dealing with what has been termed the numerical miraculousness, al-I'jaz al-I'dadi, of the Qur'an. One of the earliest books in this category was Al-I'jaz al-I'dadi fi al-Qur'an al-Karim by Abdul Razzaq Nawfal, which came out in the early 1970s. In this book, Nawfal includes long lists of the pairings, al-Mathani, on which the language of the Qur'an is based. We find, for example, that the words meaning night, layl, and day, nahar, occur in the same number of times in the Qur'an. Similarly, the words referring to paradise, al-Jannah, and hell, an-nar, occur equal numbers of times. And words referring to angels, malaika, and demons, shaitan, shayateen, occur equal numbers of times. He even notes that the word for month, shahar, occurs exactly 12 times in the Qur'an, while the word for day, yawm, occurs exactly 365 times in the Qur'an. But really, Fakhruddin Razi was the first to draw attention to this linguistic mystery in the Qur'an in the context of discussing the term Mathani in Surah Zumar, which speaks of the Qur'an as a divine writ, fully consistent within itself. Kitaban mutashabihan, repeating each statement of the truth in manifold forms. Mathani, a divine writ. Whereat shiver the skins of all who of their sustainers stand in awe. After discussing this, after doing a literature report, he comes down to how his book differs from all of its predecessors. As for this book, it will focus exclusively on what I consider to be the truly miraculous aspect of the language of the Qur'an, namely its newness. It is a newness that is not limited to a word here or an expression there. Rather, it encompasses the language of the entire Qur'an from beginning to end, vertically and horizontally, linguistically and rhetorically, on the level of words, particles, structures, and expressions in terms of formulations, rhythms, images, and explanations, and with an intensity the likes of which no human being could have produced or even approached. And so this is his point of departure. Yet, despite this linguistic newness, and now please pay attention, despite this linguistic newness, the Qur'an preserved the foundations of the Arabic language and was eminently comprehensible to the people who heard it. Indeed, not only did they understand the Qur'an despite the newness of its language, they were unspeakably impressed by it. Unspeakably impressed by it. Anyone today who's telling you that the Qur'an was not understood by the Arab of that time, by the people of that time, whom it was originally meant for, in the sense of the instant milieu, is lying to you, is basically taking away from the miraculousness of the Qur'an. In volume 1 of his book AlMajiza, there is actually this incident of Utbah bin Rabi'ah that Dr. Ahmad Bassam Saeh tells us about. أخرج أبو يعلى والحاكم والبيهقي وابن عساكر عن جابر بن عبد الله قال اجتمع قريش يوما فقالوا. The incident goes something like this. One day all the Quraysh, their what do you call that? Their tribes leaders, they got together one day and they said, look, we are the most knowledgeable in sahar, in mesmerism through our fasaha and balagha, in shair, in rhetoric, and in all of these literary fields of knowledge. فَلْيَأْتِ هَذَا الرَّجُلُ. And here comes this man, i.e. our Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And he has made our task more difficult. And he has nullified our religion. So let's go and talk to this guy and see what he's all about. And then they said, Utbah bin Rabi'ah is the most knowledgeable among us. So they sent Utbah bin Rabi'ah to our beloved Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And he came to the Prophet and he said, Ya Muhammad, Anta khayrun am Abdullah, Anta khayrum am Abdul Muttalib. And he said in harsher words whatever he said. But our Nabi, our Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he did not answer him. But when he was done with whatever he wanted to say, فَقَالَ رَسُولُ اللَّهِ فَرَغْتَ. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam asked him after he said whatever he wanted to say, فَرَغْتَ, is that all? And he said, Naam. فَقَالَ رَسُولُ اللَّهِ sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And then the Prophet replied him, not from his own tongue, but from Allah's word. He recited Surah Hamim Fussilat. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Hamim Tanzilum Minar Rahmanir Rahim. Kitabun Fussilat Ayatuhu Hatta Balagha Fain a'ridu faqul a'anzartukum sa'aqatan mithla sa'iqati 'Adin wa Thamud. Destruction of 'Ad and Thamud. This is what he read. فقال عتبة حسبك ما عندك غير هذا قال لا فرجع إلى قريش. Then he asked, is this what you want to say? And the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, yes, this is all I have. So he came back to Quraysh, to his tribe. فقالوا ما وراءك. Said, what happened? He said, I spoke of all things you wanted me to speak of. فَقَالُوا فَهَلْ أَجَابَكَ. They asked, so did he reply to you? And he said, يَقْسِمُ بِالْكَعْبَةِ. he swore by Kaaba and he said, "Ma fahimtu shay'an mimma qal." I couldn't understand anything from what he said except for the later part, for the last part, the part about Aad and Thamud. قالوا ويلك, said, I don't know how to translate this expression into English. If any of you can help me. Waylak, ya wayl, waylak, ya wayl, waylak. They said, what are you, mad? يكلمك بالعربية وما تدري ما قال. يكلمك بالعربية وما تدري ما قال. He spoke to you in Arabic and you don't know what he said. He said, لا والله ما فهمت شيئا مما قال غير ذكر الصاعقة. He said, no, I have not understood anything except for the azab on Aad and Thamud. And after telling us about this incident with Utbah, there is something very important that Dr. Ahmad Bassam Saeh hints upon. And he says that Utbah did not understand a word from what the Prophet ﷺ recited to him. لَيْسَ لِأَنَّ لُغَةَ الْقُرْآنِ غَيْرَ عَرَبِيَّةٍ وَلَيْسَتْ مَفْهُومًا. Not because this lughat was not Arabic or not understandable, but it is because Utbah was thinking about two things at the same time. He was thinking about the direct meanings of the words, and he was at the same time معان جديدة ومختلفة وعربية كلًا عليه. And he was at the same time thinking about the newness of the expression, the way these words were formed and framed in new lingual expressions. وَالْقُدْرَةُ, and his mind is but one. His mind is but one. At that point in time, when he was concentrating on الكلمات القوية والصدمات المتلاحقة للغة الجديدة وألفاظها وتراكيبها وبنائها وعلاقاتها التي تختلف عن كل ما عرف من قبل. When he was concentrating on all the expressions that were different from everything that he had known, how could he have dealt with the imminent meanings of the words as well? He wasn't able to understand because his mind was busy in deciphering this phenomenon of newness, this phenomenon of tarakib jadida, of new expressions. This is what his mind was busy with. ليست لأنها غير مفهومة, not because it was not Arabic or that ليست مفهومة or that it wasn't understandable to the Arabs of that time. So we need to understand this once and for all. If you're saying that the language that the Qur'an brought is a language which the Arabs of that time could not understand, then you are taking away from the miraculousness of the language of the Qur'an. Where is the miracle in that? If this is something foreign to them, if this is a specialized locution, if this is something new for them, something that they cannot understand, that is foreign, then what is the miraculousness? The miraculousness, the very fact that the language is miraculous, lies within the fact that it is understandable to those people. They understand it 100%, and they get the newness. They understand the newness. That is the miraculousness of the language of the Qur'an. That is the miracle of Qur'an. If you say that this was a specialized language that the Arabs of that time could not understand, then where is the miracle? Where is the miracle in that? So you need to understand this. There is an idiom which is often attributed to Ali bin Abi Talib, karramallahu wajhahu al-kareem. Inhu hadha an-nahw. There are multi versions. There are more than one version of the incident. So I'm not going to go into that, not going to go into the details of that here, but just to talk about, just want to briefly talk about the schools of Nuhat, the grammarian schools that came into being after the Qur'an was revealed. We don't have any indication of Arabic grammar being taught or learnt anywhere before the Qur'an. The Qur'an is the phenomenon that gave birth to the Nahw, the part of Arabic language that deals with syntax and syntactical structures, with A'rab. It started with Hazrat Ali saying, Inhu hadha an-nahw. He wrote down some basics of this grammatical discipline, and then told somebody, I'm forgetting the name of this guy, then told him to Inhu hadha an-nahw, proceed in this direction, i.e. build upon this. This is how Nahw actually started. This is how Nahw actually was born, this side of the Arabic grammar that is concerned with what? With eggs? Huh? With what? With syntax and syntactical structures. It's called a Nahw. So somebody can argue, well, there are so many differences amongst the language speakers themselves. Sure. And all of those differences are preserved within the text of the Qur'an. These are differences in lahjat, nuances here and there. وَالضُّحَى وَاللَّيْلِ إِذَا سَجَى وَالضُّحَى وَاللَّيْلِ إِذَا سَجَى وَالشَّمْسِ وَضُحَاهَا وَالشَّمْسِ وَضُحَيْهَا. Ard, for example, wal ard, the naql of Hamza. And a few words, around 42 words are different, differ from one qira'ah to another. But these differences, these variations are all preserved within the multiform text of the Qur'an itself. Don't try to fool us and tell us, like some of the people are doing nowadays, and saying, only we know the true meaning of this Arabic that Qur'an has brought, and the Arabs of that time could not understand it. You're making no sense, because if they couldn't understand it, then what is the miracle of the Qur'an? Why did Allah bestow it upon the Prophet ﷺ and by extension Arabs of that time? So anyone who's telling you that is trying to take away from the miraculousness of the Qur'an. And only a non-Muslim can make a claim like that. So please be aware of the charlatans. And inshallah, we'll continue from this. And in the next section, we're going to look at the impact of the Qur'an's newness on the Arabs of the Prophet's day. Inshallah, that's the next section. So till then, take care of yourselves, your progeny, your parents, everyone around you, in your town, city, country, in your world. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.